Good evening. I'm glad you're here, and I hope we'll look at some things that will be helpful to you. You've always been very gracious in making it possible for me to go to places to preach the gospel throughout the years. It's now been, this is hard to believe, it's been 23 years since I made my first trip to Ethiopia and the Seychelles. But you have supported us all through the years in doing those things. Do you ever wonder where the apostles went to preach the gospel after they left Jerusalem and Judea? The scriptures don't say a lot about that. Tradition does. There are strong traditions about where the apostles went in preaching the gospel and fulfilling the Great Commission's charge to go into all the world and to go make disciples of all nations. So they didn't just stay in Jerusalem and Judea. Tradition can teach us a lot. I've learned to pay more attention to historical traditions than I used to. That's usually a root of truth in it. But for example, Andrew, it says, preached in Russia and helped establish the church in what became Constantinople, and preached in Greece. John, of course, was around Ephesus in Asia Minor. James the Elder was said to have traveled to Spain. Thomas is said to have gone as far as India. There's a very strong tradition in India about that. Matthew preached in Parthia or Persia and in Ethiopia. Philip labored in Scythia, in the region around the Black and Caspian Seas, and Bartholomew was associated with work in Armenia. That's very fascinating to me, that I put in my mind that the apostles really did go into all the world to preach the gospel, that it went far beyond just hometown area. And that was such an important part of the New Testament work. Saul and Barnabas seemed to be very comfortable in Antioch in Acts chapter 13 and working there, and the Holy Spirit had to come to them and say, you need to get out and go preach the gospel to the places I want you to go. And then after they'd done that and they got over to the edge of Asia Minor, they had to have another vision to tell them to keep going, to go over to the European continent and begin to preach in Greece and Macedonia. Paul, of course, had a plan to eventually go to Spain himself and preach the gospel, which was the very edge of the civilized world at that time. That was as far as you could go. So the mindset, the apostolic mindset, and the clear teaching from Scripture was, we go into all the world to preach the gospel, not just in our own country or close to home, that's what we do. This last trip was one where I had the opportunity to renew relationships as much as anything. As you know, circumstances have kept me from going for several years. This was the first trip in 7 years, though it is my 11th trip over there. And getting back to see what was happening and the developments that had taken place, all that was extremely encouraging. So let me talk to you about Ethiopia, and then we'll talk about the Seychelles. And I'm being optimistic here, but I wanted to leave some time for Q&A at the end, so I'll try to do that. The African continent is huge, and one of the larger countries on that continent is Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the 27th largest country in the world, has well over 100 million people. In fact, now it's close to 132 million. I didn't update that. Addis Ababa, the capital, usually has about 10 million people in it. You see the per capita income, about $550 per person, mentioned 19 times in the Bible, in the American Standard Version. Some question about whether Cush is actually the modern Ethiopia or not, but we'll take the references. All this says that this is a region that is not unfamiliar with the gospel, and it is an area of influence and an area of opportunity. Our involvement began in about 1999 when James Finney and Harry Pickup Jr. and Melvin Curry and Bob Owen had the opportunity to go there to begin to work with some churches that were already there, that were associated with our institutional brethren and had set things up on a mission organization where you had a headquarters church in the country through which everything worked. Teaching there caused several churches to break away from that, and as a result, out of that began this tremendous growth among the brethren there during that time. So we have spent time through the years in working in areas where we were trying to strengthen the church by teaching preachers and teachers. When we've gone, we don't go to evangelize. I can't get out on the street in Ethiopia and evangelize. I stick out like a sore thumb, first of all, but secondly, I do not know the language, I do not know the culture. What we try to do is to open the scriptures with preachers and teachers and help bring them to maturity and the understanding of the Word of God so they can go out and do the work. And that's what we have done during this time. Scott Owen was my companion, as he has been since Bob was got to the point that he was unable to go. Scott and I have been together on trips 3 times now. Our companions, well, let me back up just a minute. The 3 areas where we go, marked there on the map, are Addis Ababa, but then to the south you will see Hosanna and Irgalim. These are the 3 areas where we go to teach, and I'll talk more about them as we go along. Mesfin and Zerahun are almost always our companions, men of maturity and ability. If Zerahun preached here, this congregation would profit tremendously. He's a man who I believe could preach in any congregation in this country and do an effective and powerful job. Mesfin is an outstanding preacher also. But there are men who we depend on heavily and have a great understanding of what is going on in the work there. And they travel with us. And that was true this time. And they did most of the translating and also working with us in the places we went. So we go to Hosanna. I'll briefly go through what we did in some of these places. Hosanna is an administrative center of what is called the Hadiyah Zone. And some of the earliest successes of the gospel were in this area, going back into the 60s and 70s. One of the men we support, Marcus, is one of the men who was instrumental in really spreading the gospel in that area. Marcus really had a hand in thousands coming to the Lord throughout his lifetime. Through the years, this work has grown tremendously there, and our opportunities of what we do there. Find a place where we can get the guys together, and we'll meet with them for about 3 days, and 80% of them are preachers. The other 20% would be men of ability and teachers from the congregations in those areas. I taught from Ephesians. You got a sermon from Ephesians recently. That's why you got it. But the opportunity to renew old acquaintances was so important this time. And I did try to meet with preachers we support. These 3 men we've supported for several years now, Marcus and Demaka and Jeremiah. They continue to preach. This last trip, Marcus had been quite ill, had been in the hospital. He had suffered with pneumonia twice and got to visit in his daughter's home where he was staying there in the Hosanna area and visit with him. Some of you wrote letters to Marcus and Demaka and Jeremiah, and they were deeply appreciative of it. But Marcus is better now. You gave money for Bibles. After a while, you gave so much, I started telling people, now, the money you're giving me, I'll probably be using for benevolence, not for Bibles. And that's what a lot of that money I used for was to help to help Marcus with his hospital bills. When they have hospital bills, they have no way really to handle that other than getting help from other people and paying what little they can along the way. So that was a great help to Marcus. And Marcus is in better health now and back at work. But that was, the experience in Hosanna has always been a good one because that is one of the strongest areas of the gospel in Ethiopia right now is out in the Hadiyah Zone in Hosanna. And we always enjoy going there, getting the chance to do some preaching, but to spend that time with those men. Through the years, it has been wonderful to see so many of these preachers grow to maturity, to learn more and more and more, and that they are such good Bible students now and effective preachers of the gospel. So Hosanna has always been on our list. It's always been profitable, and it was good to be able to go back there again. These are some of the preachers you support that we were with in Hosanna. I made an effort to meet with every preacher that we now support, the 53 men that we support. Didn't quite accomplish it, but was able to talk to people who knew these men who for some reason may not have been able to come to the classes or were ill. So I did make that effort, and these are several of them in meetings there, and we'll talk about some more of them in a minute. But they are so attentive, so interested, and ask such good questions that it's obviously their growth is clear. And when you realize how many people they're baptizing, how many new churches are being established, you realize the commitment that these men have to the gospel and the effective work that they're doing. Most of the men we support don't preach at one congregation. They're preaching at 3 or 4. And most of what we provide for them really is travel money that they can use to go out into other areas around where they are in preaching the gospel. That's what, to a great extent, we try to do. This is a group just out of Hosanna that we met with on Sunday morning. You see Scott preaching there on the left, the building in the middle. It's a solid building. You go inside, it's a concrete floor and block walls, one room. That's what it is. But very accommodative for them to use that. I put these two guys on the right. The guy on the left is over 100 years old and took a leading part in the worship that morning. His brother had just passed away 2 weeks before. He was 108. So there is some longevity over there. The guy on the right, I think, was just in his 90s, as I recall. But wonderful to meet with groups and of men who have really been involved in the Lord's work for many, many decades there, all through the years. Yergalem, further to the south. Yergalem is, and of course we're talking about a third world country, but there are areas in third world country where economy is a little better, areas where it's not as good. Yergalem is one of the poorer areas. But the gospel takes root there, and such a dedicated men there in trying to spread the gospel. Our work began there really as a result of one man named Sagai who heard about the classes that were being taught in Hosanna. This was many years ago, but he heard of it. He just had the name of one man, Marcus, and he decided he was going up there and find Marcus and see if he could get men to come down and teach. So he took the bus one day, he walked one day because of funds, had to spend the night out under a tree one night until he could find Marcus. And finally he found Marcus and talked to Marcus to talk to us, to get us to come down and teach classes there. So the next year Scott and Bob went, and we've been going ever since. And the work has just grown tremendously in that area. From Yergalem, the gospel has gone south almost to the border of Kenya. And that's a long ways. And the way it spread, one of the guys there raised money to get an old motorcycle. And once he got a motorcycle, he would travel a day and a half down toward the border to some villages and towns he knew down there and began preaching the gospel. The gospel was not there. Now there are about 4 congregations down in that area as a result of that. Amazing commitment and the open heart of these people. I've talked to you about that before. The humility and the open heart of these people is amazing. They are willing to listen, and they can be persuaded with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Our classes there, we had about 170. I forgot to mention that in Hosanna we had over 200 in those classes there. 170 men in the classes in Irgala. Hosanna and Irgala are the areas where the men we support are located. I just picked out just a few to put up here as representative. The first one is Sagai, the man I talked about that traveled the 2 days to find Marcus so that they would come down and teach. The first time we really sat down there to talk to him about the work there, he could not talk about it without tears in his eyes, about how thrilled he was that men had come to help them to learn the Bible and to teach the gospel. Mengistu has been preaching the gospel for 18 years. He's 65 years old. Now, if you go back 18 years, that's going back to about 2007. Our first trips were in 1999. Several of these men, though older, developed and began to preach the gospel during these times. Next to him is Amela Fossa. He preaches for the Odala congregation in the Irgalam area. He's 65 years old. Well, if they live to be 108, they've still got a long career in front of them. But he's been preaching for about the same length of time. But there are younger men also. Alamu Gamora there on the right is 37 years old. Defene Fatamu is 38 years old. But then the guy on the right, that's Israel Docker, he's 80. But the reason I put him there, he's been preaching for 56 years, and he was one of the very first converts in the Hawassa Monopole area, which is between Hosanna and Irgalam. He's blind. And he has continued to teach and to preach all through the years and continues to have tremendous influence in that area. Three interesting guys here. There was a woman who had a brother that was a guard in a prison there. And she wanted the preacher to talk to her brother who was a guard. He began to talk with him about the gospel, and he was baptized. Once he was baptized and really became interested in serving the Lord, he began to talk to prisoners. He ended up baptizing 3 prisoners. The brethren tell me about these 3 men. He said, well, one deserved to be in there, I think, guilty of theft or something. They said the other 2 were in there really as political prisoners. They really hadn't done anything wrong. But the teaching of these men changed their lives, transformed them. They're all out of prison. Obviously, they've got their picture. But they are now involving themselves in preaching the gospel, and 2 of them would really like to preach. Our practice has always been, and men say now we want to preach the gospel, that we don't start supporting them immediately. And this is advice of men over there even to us. We want them to prove themselves, to see if they're really committed to it. And wait at least a year to see if these men are really committed to doing it on their own, to preaching the gospel. So these men, maybe in a year or so, may be men that will be giving their lives to preaching the gospel. It was fascinating talking to them and the whole process they went to. Very, very humble men, and appreciated them very much. Well, there are just all kinds of men that I could talk about that we support. These are some of the others, and came to appreciate them. I got one guy up there twice. I guess really liked him. I'm not sure how that happened, but as I say, I always forget the number, 52, 53 that we are supporting now. And they are so appreciative of what we do. We do not support any of these guys full time. All these are given supplemental work to enable them to do their work as an evangelist, to meet expenses, to help them to do that. Most of them are working in some way from what they produce on their small plot of land or what jobs they can get. They're supplementing that with what we give them to be able to preach the gospel. Let's go into Addis. In this country, I find the field more fertile in metro areas and urban areas. The greater challenge to convert is in rural areas. I think that has something to do with the Christian background of this country. But the greater struggle in Ethiopia is in urban settings. And you would look at Addis and say, well, 10 million people. Well, the numbers are there, but it's difficult. But there are a handful of churches there that work in that area, and they are growing. The time we spent there, we taught about 40 men that came for classes there on the days that we taught, which means in the time we were there in the 3 places we were at, there were over 400 men in the classes that we taught during that time. Incidentally, we helped them to get to the classes. We will help them some with transportation. We will help them with the per diem so they can have some help with a place to stay and some food, which is extremely cheap, but we do that to enable them to come. But we're able to have about that many. In Addis, the difference is many, if not most, can understand English, but not all. So we still use translators. We're speaking through translators in all these situations. Now, what changed on this trip is that on Saturday, Pam arrived after 2 weeks. And Pam was able to be in Addis for just the weekend before we went to the Seychelles. But she, of course, gets immediately involved. We had the experience of, on that weekend, that Sunday, going to worship with the church at Barayu, which is out on the outskirts of Addis Ababa. It's a work that's doing really well. It's one of the few that's been able to build their own building and establish that. But the preachers there had 10 people together that they were going to baptize that weekend. And so we went out to a lake. The first place we went that morning was out to the lake, to the baptism of these 10 people. They were from 2 different congregations there, a little different from us. Baptizing people is, well, they don't have baptistries in their building. So baptisms happen, and then, like on that Sunday morning, there was maybe 7 or 8 people with those who were baptized, and then we all went to the building where everybody was. We enjoyed seeing Tucker being baptized this morning. That's wonderful with us all together. But I remember one of my early trips there, they talked about, well, so-and-so's going to be baptized this morning, all excited about that. And so I got to the building and said, well, what about the baptism? Brother Alamu's baptizing them. They'll be here in a little while. And you just thought, wow, miss out on that. But this was a wonderful experience, an exciting experience. How often do you get to see 10 people baptized into Christ at one time in doing this? And yeah, they have these robes. I think baptismal garments are only available in whatever the denominations use, so I think that's what this is that they got, but certainly very suitable. And that was cold water, folks. Ethiopia you think of as being burning hot. It's not. Addis Ababa is over 1 mile above sea level, and Hosanna is 1.5 miles above sea level. And very mild temperatures can get very cool at night. So that was a wonderful experience. And of course, then worshiped with the group at Barayu. Barayu, as I said, is a growing congregation, a growing area, and a lot has been accomplished there. And it was here that where Pam was able to get involved with the ladies there, to teach them that afternoon, and to be involved in what's going on. Pam has been writing her own accounts of this. Pam keeps journals so that she can refer back and say, so you really did do that. No, that's not why she keeps them. She keeps journals on our trips, and they're wonderful help. But she's been writing her own report on this. I just wanted to read a couple of excerpts from that. She said, I met Steve in Addis Ababa on August 30th. Steve had already been teaching in the Ethiopian countryside for 2 weeks. We worshiped with the Barayu Church on Sunday, but before the worship, we went to the river and watched as 10 people were baptized in the Christ. It was the first for me to see 10 souls baptized at one time, and so very encouraging. After the worship, I had the privilege of teaching about 25 women, through an interpreter, a lesson on growing to maturity in the Lord, with emphasis on teaching their children to be the next generation of the church in Ethiopia. We also gave the children cards that the kids from university had made, and they were so excited, and they were. She mentions what we did the night before. We visited in Zerahun and Martha's home. Zerahun is the preacher I referred to earlier. Their power was out when we arrived. That's normal there. It was Ethiopian food eaten with injera, their native flatbread, and eating utensil. We were asked to cut the cake, which is a big honor to get to cut the cake, and then a traditional Ethiopian coffee ceremony. You ought to look that up. That's really neat that they do in the house, the full preparation. So we had that experience there, and I was so glad Pam got to meet some of the people that I've had a relationship with for all these years. And I'm thankful for what is continuing to go on in the work at Ethiopia, not only with Scott and Bob and I. Mark Neesmith, Kerry Mosley's dad, travels to Ethiopia. The Thomasville work is very involved in that, and some others have gone. Some of you know Randy Harshbarger. David Holder went for years. His health is precluding him from going now, but there are others that have been involved in this work through the years to produce the results. The results of the work, I just wanted to give you briefly some statistics that Zerahun put together. This is really from several years ago. But that when churches began to break away from the mission and to try to be independent and autonomous churches, there was in about 2002, there were about 40 or 41 churches that decided to become independent churches to operate on their own. Since that time, and the work growing, now there are around 400 independent churches in Ethiopia. The number of Christians in those churches now numbers about 18,500. And that would have been an increase from about, I believe it was about 3,500 in the beginning. These are people being baptized out of the world. Some of it, a smaller part of it, has been congregations that have left the institutional camp to become independent churches to begin to work on their own. So from a numerical standpoint, it's been an amazing story to see about what is developed there, and to know the dedication of so many of those men there, and that you are involved in that. I think that's so important for you to understand. They experience the same highs and lows we do. They have baptisms and growth. They develop maturity in congregations. They also have local problems in congregations, just like we do. Some of the preachers are not as effective as others. Occasionally, a preacher will do something, proves himself unworthy of support. They have weak members. Some of them will have internal strife. Human nature is the same everywhere. But there is great commitment there, and as a result, such great growth that is taking place. Your extra funds that you gave me provided for over 200 Bibles that able to distribute. And these are nice Bibles in Amharic, the most common language there. And then, as I say, other funds were used for benevolent reasons, help for medical costs with Marcus. I learned when I got there that just a week or so before I got there, one of the preachers we supported passed away. That support for a month or so here, brethren, has become benevolence instead of evangelistic support, but that will do that. That's not unusual in that kind of situation for that to happen. You have to remember there's no government safety net there. No Medicare, no Medicaid, nothing like that. So sometimes that happens. A lot of similar situations like that. But they all express their deepest gratitude to you. Marcus Damaka and Eremias were so appreciative of the letters that some of you wrote to them. And the children were thrilled to death to get the cards from the children here. They love that so much. And they will hang on to them. There have been times when I've come back a year or two later and some child would show me the card that I'd given to them the year before or a couple of years before in doing that. It means so much to them. Let's talk about the Seychelles for a little bit. The Seychelles is an archipelago of about 115 islands, most of which are uninhabited. It is out in the Indian Ocean, about 1,000 miles off the east coast of Kenya. The main island is Mahe. Population there of about 121,000, 90,000 of them live on Mahe, and the capital city is Victoria, which is where the local work is. Its ethnicity is a mixture of African, Indian, European, British and English influence back through the colonial days. Most of them, most common language they have is their own version of Creole, a mixture of English and French. It is a tourist paradise. I did a lot of evangelizing right there. No. Victoria, a beautiful city. This is not a third world country. I would call it a second world country. Higher standard of living, but not like Ethiopia and in that area. Beautiful places. These are very rare tortoises, a group that we saw in one of the parks there. But so many unique things that you see there. And it's sort of like the Caribbean for Europe. That's kind of where they go down into that area, into Mauritius, into those areas. First became acquainted with this work, Pam and I both, through meeting Robert and Andrea Smith when he was preaching in Kiel, Germany, right on the north border of Germany. We were helping to support Robert, and we went over there, not here, this was all the way back to when I was preaching in Birmingham, and became acquainted with them. They, at one point, decided, after they had visited the Seychelles, they were going to start a work there. There was nothing there. And so they went, and from scratch, in the mid-90s, Robert and Andrea went and began to preach the gospel there. Robert was an amazing person. He died suddenly from a heart attack several years ago. But they together established a work there, building it to 35, 40, 45 people pretty quickly. People of ability, people of character, some amazing people that were converted during that time. And as a result of knowing them, we became connected with the Seychelles work and began to visit there. Pam and I went in 2002 and 2004 and established relationships with those people during that time. I continued to go every other year up until about 2018, I think was the last year, and this is the first time I've been since then. Jimmy and Tabitha and their children. Many of you know Jimmy and Tabitha. Jimmy and Tabitha met at Florida College when he came over to get some Bible instruction. They met, married, and their plans were to return when Tabitha developed leukemia. And so for about 4 years, their return was delayed until she overcame that, and she has been fine ever since that. Once she got over it, she's done well. Jimmy is of exceptional ability, and they are a wonderful couple in working in the kingdom there. Again, Jimmy could work as a preacher anywhere. I would love to have him as a co-worker. If you ever leave, decide to leave, let me know. I'll get Jimmy in here. But very special. They are both very dedicated to the kingdom. The work continues to grow and to prosper there. They have a hard time finding places to meet. usually having to move from place to place. Several of you may remember that a few years ago, they, through tremendous sacrifice on their own part, bought a piece of property, building on. That has been delayed all this time because of legalities. Actually ended up with an influential neighbor who decided he didn't want a church building on that property, and money talks in the Seychelles. So they are close to accomplishing something with the government. The government's going to do a land swap with them. Take that land and give them land somewhere else. They still got legalities to work out. So hopefully that's still going to take place. They were meeting, their latest meeting place was in a technical school where they got, after we got there, met with them on Wednesday night, came Sunday. There was a fire at the landfill, not far from the technical school. The roads were blocked, they couldn't meet there. This is in a cafe that Tabitha has started and is running on the side. She's quite a businesswoman, and they do this to try to establish their ability to be there and not have to have major support from the outside. They're working to that end, and she's been quite successful at this. So we jammed about 70 people into this little cafe. I look like I'm taking up 2 seats there. It zeroed in right on me, the guy that looks like he doesn't know what's going on. But there, it's a really neat little cafe, but everybody knows where it is. It's a meeting place. And in fact, it's a place where we met more than one of the members to sit down and visit with them for an hour or two. And many of them pouring out their hearts to you about their lives and about their challenges. But that was a wonderful worship hour that morning with those people. All of many varied backgrounds, ethnicities, all that love each other very much, and to see that grow and mature. Peter Lalonde there, they brought flowers to Pam at the airport when we arrived. I assumed they weren't for me. They handed them to her. Marianne on the right works at the airport, one of the members there. So many challenges in her life, and a wonderful visit with her for a couple of hours in the cafe one afternoon. One evening, I met with the teenagers. A group that's small, you say, well, what kind of teens can they have? They had about 17 there that night, about 20 young people in all. And they're doing an amazing job with their teens, particularly in that culture and in that setting. Just an amazing group of young people. So that night we got queried. No class taught. Jimmy wanted us to sit down and just let them ask us questions. So that really put some anxiety on Pam. She wasn't ready for that, but once we got started, it was great. She did wonderful, and they asked her a lot of questions. But looking at us, what would they ask us about? They asked us about marriage, about picking a husband and wife, about being married that long, about being an elder. They want to know about elders. Several questions that related to those kinds of things, and they spent an hour quizzing us, and it was a wonderful experience. It just says that there is a future for the work there in the Seychelles because they are raising their children. First time I went, the church was all first-generation Christians. Now it's second-generation Christians, and there's one third-generation Christian there at this point. So it's seeing the work grow and develop in a most challenging setting, and of their own plans to try to start another work on the other end of the island if they can accomplish that in time. So this is the direction that they are going. Pam was able to teach a ladies' class on Saturday, and she's been WhatsApping with I don't know how many people ever since we got back. Her contacts, Pam builds ties and relationships with people so easily. And so she's got teens and young married couples and elderly people that she's texting with all the time. They love it. They stay in connection with her also. And it's a wonderful way to be able to do that. As I've said, Jimmy and Tabitha are exceptional, as are Titus and Alana, their children. wonderful ones. Great families developing there. They're very close to an eldership now. They probably could appoint an eldership now out of these, what were first-generation Christians at a time. And it's wonderful to see that. Wonderful families like Peter and Jennifer Lalonde and Tracy and John Mark David. These are strong families, and they will be strong leaders. This is one of my favorite works, one of the great success stories that I see of the gospel starting from scratch that you don't see a lot of in the world today. And to me, it's just the way things should work from that standpoint. Pam's role. We worshiped with them on Sunday, she writes, and on 2 Tuesday nights. After Sunday services, we had a potluck for Creole food. We also gave the kids the cards from your kids here at university. We were in the Seychelles for 2 weeks. It was not a vacation. It was all about teaching and encouraging the Christians there. We met with people daily in their home or in Tabitha's cafe to encourage and listen to the problems, grief, or spiritual questions. I left with a lot of tears for these men and women and teenagers and kids who were so very dear to me. I may not see them again. I came home inspired by the faith of the Christians in Ethiopia and the Seychelles who serve the Lord all the time. They have lost people to the world, but remain steadfast to the Lord. I'm sure I received much more than the little I gave. It is a tough environment to keep children and others faithful. They told me this time that if they still had everyone that had been baptized since the work started, the work would be over 200 people. So that's the challenge. But it remains there and it remains strong. Well, this is the work you're doing. This is what your giving is accomplishing in these places. And you have to think of it from that standpoint. You have fellowship in these works. And you need to be praying for these brethren and for these preachers, and that these places far away from us have brothers and sisters in Christ who are just like you and me, trying to serve the Lord in a challenging world. Well, let's see if anybody's got any questions. Yeah.
The political situation in some African nations, have obviously been in the news a lot lately, right? What's the general political situation in Ethiopia?
Ethiopia in recent years has had some unsettled situations. It's mainly up in northern Ethiopia, and it's a result of some battles politically about who's going to control the country. Ethiopia was basically under communist control until the wall fell, mid-90s, and changed. But there's still political unrest there. We've never felt unsafe. Those brethren are always with us, and we travel with them. And there's been an occasion or two where we'd get up that morning and say, well, we're not going that way, we're going this way. There's some unrest in the village over here, we're not going that way. But politically, it's settled enough that everything functions as much as it can in a third world country. So it hasn't been really a hindrance to the work.
Steve, to Gary's point, we know of situations like where Alan Malone in India, the brethren both in Ethiopia and Seychelles, do they deal with groups of people that are overtly antagonistic towards the gospel? Does that inhibit the spread there?
I would say not like is happening, like Alan's dealing with in India, and as people in Christendom, as they'd call it, are having begun to deal with in India. What is growing in Ethiopia, as it is in so much of Africa, is Islam. And the way Islam will work there, as it does in many places, is that they work to control an area, to try to develop an area. There are some towns we go through. There's one we go through, a good-sized town, traveling, that has about 7 different mosques in it, that they have taken control of that area. I've never been able to get clear from them whether they've put Sharia law into effect in that town or those cities. I don't know if they've gone that far. But that influence is growing. There are areas west of Addis where brethren are facing persecution from Muslim groups out there, that is happening out in there. That's a different area from where we would go. Randy goes out there. Randy Harshbarker goes out into that area some. But they're facing that. But politically, it is tolerant. They consider themselves a Christian nation. They have their own version of the Catholic Church. It comes out of the Coptic Church. They have their own pope. So it is influenced from a Christian viewpoint at least, so that has made it more tolerable. And I think given the open field that is there to be able to teach and preach and convert so many people.
What did like Jimmy say or Tabitha say is kind of the reasoning that they're thinking why it's been so difficult in the Seychelles specifically for people to stay with the church and not fall away? Like why have they felt that struggle? Is it like social or is there like antagonism? What's been the cause of that there?
Okay, she's asking about the challenge in the Seychelles of these people staying faithful, so many falling away. I'll tell you how Jimmy describes it and how others describe it. And I say it as they say it. This isn't for me. They said it's an island mentality. And what they mean by that is it is very laid back, lax, lax moral practices, high alcoholism, poverty plays a role in that. It's not unusual for young married couples to live with their parents into their 30s because they can't afford to build a home, and that creates problems. So there is a culture there, an island culture, as they describe it, that is ingrained in that setting that they say is hard to come with. Marriage is something most people don't want to be bothered with, type of thing. So many of the couples in the church there, when they obeyed the gospel, that's when they got married, type of thing. Again, that's not my assessment of it. That's what they tell me about what you're dealing with. Well, I mean, we deal with that too, don't we? It's getting worse, but that's just the setting there. Okay. Yeah.
You mentioned several times about the cards to the kids and how much that made an impact. Are there ways that brethren here can do that even when you're not going? Can they send cards through mail or email?
Well, emailing, he's asking about doing things like the kids have done, sending the cards and that kind of thing. Email may be ways to do that, but you've got to understand everybody doesn't have internet in their house there. What everybody does have is a cell phone. And that's amazing. You can't put landlines to mud huts out in the countryside, but you can have a cell phone. And so that's what the culture is built on there. And it makes sense, really, from that standpoint. They pay bills on the phone. They do all of that. But communicating, there is, of course, the language barrier. But mailing things by the mail is slow and cost prohibitive, really. You just have to figure out ways where you can encourage through email, and maybe we can talk about some ways to do that. All right. Okay, we'll stop there. I just want to thank you again for your commitment to making these kinds of things possible. Not only for me, the support you gave to JP to go to Mexico, to me, the foresight this congregation has in seeing the field is the world. And we can't say, well, there's plenty to do around in our area, instead of, well, it's hard to keep up with all that out there. When the Holy Spirit came to Saul of Tarsus and Barnabas and said, you need to go, I think they could have said, well, there's plenty to do here in Antioch. I don't think they did that. Let's keep our hearts and minds set upon the field being the world and spreading the gospel. My standpoint. Okay. Children's class. And Nick.